Let me welcome everyone to this EUniWell lecture. It's a real pleasure for me to introduce Professor Daniele Vignoli. Daniele is an enthusiastic colleague that University of Florence is honored to have. Daniele did his PhD in Rome La Sapienza, and after a very rapid and successful career, he is now full professor of demography at University of Florence. He's also the scientific coordinator of the Population and Society Unit at University of Florence. He leads an ERC consolidator grant on economic uncertainty and fertility in Europe, as well as several other research projects, many of them. Daniele is editor-in-chief of the Journal of Population Science and is co-director of the initiative Florence Population Studies, which is a collaboration between the University of Florence and the European University Institute here in Florence, a European institution. The research of Daniele addresses family demography, social demography, life course. In 2020, Daniele received the Dirk van Kaar Award for Social Demography from the European Association for Population Studies. This is a prestigious peer review award for outstanding achievement in the field of population. It's given every 2 years and there are very few laureates. Daniele has published extensively in top journals. He started very young and is still very young and is publishing in top journals. I'm particularly happy to introduce Daniele because he has been involved in EUniWell since the very start. And I was thrilled when he accepted to give the first EUniWell lecture at Unifi. The topic Daniele is covering is very timely. COVID-19 as an engine of family reshuffling, gender equality and relationship quality during the pandemic. i.e. what he's doing is studying the impact of the pandemic on couple relationship. It's a topic which has not been investigated much so far, and Daniele is giving us a very interesting viewpoint on it. Daniele is very rigorous in terms of technical tools, but is also able to communicate very well the result of his research. Daniele, the floor is yours. You have about 40 minutes, 45 minutes for your presentation. Please.
You can see, right? Perfect. Thank you, Georgia, for this too kind introduction, actually, and thank you to all the organizers for having invited me here today. I'm extremely happy to have the possibility to share with you some thoughts and empirical findings about gender equality and relationship quality during the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. For this presentation, I will be using two sets of data. First, I will explore the very impact of the pandemic on the early stages of the emergency in Italy, France, and Spain in April 2020. And to explore the later stages of the pandemic, I will be using new data we collected at the University of Florence in September 2021, so 1 year and a half after the onset of the pandemic. Okay, let me start from the popular Shakespearean expression, love laughs at locksmiths, which is used to mean that even during hard times, partners find a way to maintain their relationship. And the question is, did love laugh at locksmiths during the COVID-19 pandemic? Many partners were forced to live together, locked inside the same home throughout the day during a historic moment characterized by the threat of severe illness for themselves, their loved ones, as well as for the rest of humanity. So in a way, couples were held in captivity. In the initial phase of the pandemic, scholars have especially examined its consequences in terms of physical, economic, and environmental outcomes. Studies are, however, increasingly suggesting that the far-reaching impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has also influenced the family sphere. And a crucial but unresolved question is, what are the consequences of the COVID-19 disaster and its outbreak responses for relationship quality? Following first the narrative that love does not laugh at locksmiths, one can draw on stress theory. And from this perspective, natural disasters can be perceived as traumatic and worrying events that represent psychological stressors for relationship quality. Sudden shocks are in fact related to a worsening relationship functioning because of a detriment to partners' communication, support, and an increase in conflicts. And from this perspective, following the literature on natural disasters, we can find several examples of such negative effects. For example, studies show that divorce rates increase in the area affected by the Hurricane Hugo. Other studies suggested that during the SARS quarantine, individuals experienced negative psychological feelings such as depression, anger, confusion, and stress. And another example is the fact that home confinement due to the Hurricane Katrina increased partner stress too, undermining their relational processes. A negative relation between COVID-19 and relationship quality is not the only possible narrative, however. Following the perspective this time that love does laugh at locksmiths, one can rely on attachment theory by arguing that couples, in response to strong distress, strengthen their relationship. Traumatic events such as the hurricanes and terroristic bombing lead individuals seeking comfort and the security from their closest other, staying together and turning to each other. And this is partly connected to why, immediately after September 11 attacks and the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, divorce rates declined in communities involved in these events. So, from a theoretical perspective, two contrasting views can be anticipated. On the one side, the pandemic could have reduced support and increased stress among family members. On the other side, it could have increased family cohesion, bringing partners closer together. Let me try to be more analytical now and review the forces involved in the process connecting the COVID-19 pandemic and relationship quality. First, the pandemic have influenced directly the emotional sphere of partners. In fact, they could have lost their loved ones, or they might feel scared of one's own or loved one's health and mortality. Also, the uncertainty associated with the duration of the pandemic could have made hard to set a time frame for the return to normality, thus generating emotional distress. The emotional sphere could be influenced by the pandemic also in an indirect way through the imposition of stay-at-home policies. In this case, state-imposed physical distance from the loved ones, like, for instance, friends or other family members, could have increased partners' emotional distress. Overall, isolation and lack of emotional support within the couple may harm relationship quality. Second, the pandemic triggered stress increases in case of working concerns, for example, where job and income are lost by one or both partners. External stressors such as unemployment and economic hardship can affect the quality of couples' interactions and perceptions of the relationship and partner. Third, severe stay-at-home orders are also likely to generate organizational changes, organizational shifts. The school university closures and workplace lockdown shaped the spatial and temporal boundaries between paid and unpaid work during the pandemic. This, in turn, might have led to lower levels of relationship satisfaction by fostering time stress and negative subjective feelings about the division of work within couples, the division of paid work within couples. Clearly, by definition, the employment stressors and the organizational sphere stressors interact with one another, as, for instance, job loss or reduction in working hours change dramatically the availability of time at home. Finally, micro, meso, and macro pre-existing characteristics may represent vulnerabilities or, on the contrary, strengths that shape couples' processes. At the macro level, because of the context in which couples are embedded, like, for instance, welfare regimes or national cultures. At the meso level, because of individuals' social networks, like, for instance, family support, and at the individual level, as we will see, because of individuals' differential characteristics, like, for instance, gender, age, level of education, gender ideology. Finally, one clarification is also important. The array H that now I'm highlighting here in red is partly counterbalanced by an adaptive process within couples. Even if partners experience high level of negative emotions and stress, they might be able to manage stressful shocks through their own interaction. In other terms, couples may be resilient to adverse economic shocks. And this also means that, and this will be one of the key messages of this presentation, the consequences of the pandemic need to be examined not only in the short term, but also in the long term to be really able to understand the COVID-19 implications for couples' relationships. Moving from the theory to the empirics, a few findings seem quite clear-cut, especially those referring to direct stressors of relationship quality, namely those concerning the emotional sphere. The COVID-19 home confinement triggered depressive symptoms, unhappiness and loneliness during the lockdown. A systematic review of 43 studies reports that the pandemic has generated levels of anxiety and depression during than before, higher level of anxiety and depression during than before the emergency. The limitations to personal freedom and the conditions of semi-isolation have played a crucial role in intensifying such negative emotions. Overall, love in time of COVID-19 faces challenges, particularly when individuals perceive their partners as less responsive. Regarding the indirect stressors, in the short term, the negative consequences that stay-at-home policies have had on employment and income have been proved to exert a pressure on relationship quality. Moreover, COVID-19 induced an enormous increase in economic uncertainty, and uncertainty is a crucial stressor that can potentially induce relationship dissatisfaction and conflict. And finally, as anticipated in the theoretical framework, another indirect effect of the pandemic on relationship quality concerns the organizational sphere. From a gender perspective, there are reasons to expect that the pandemic hit more severely women than men, fostering prior inequalities. As Craig and Churchill in 2020 in the Australian context pointed out, the pandemic affected not only how domestic life is structured, but dramatically modified the partner's pattern of time allocation. Men and women may also react to organizational strains differently, creating a communication mismatch. So, taken all together, these findings from the so-called, let me call it COVID research, on relationship quality are not, honestly speaking, always very exciting. Being timely is the main value added of many of these studies. However, they are also often based on very selected convenience samples. Overall, they suggest a quite unique monolithic narrative, namely that the effects of the pandemic on relationship quality are mostly negative. Only recently have population-based studies also started to be published. This is one example by Schmidt and colleagues who applied fixed effect regression on paired fam data, Wave 11, and its supplementary COVID-19 web survey. They noted a substantial proportion of respondents experiencing both negative and positive changes in relationship satisfaction during the crisis. The results of this research, in line with now very many new papers published these days, describe a situation much more complex than initial intuition would actually suggest. They rather seem to suggest that the COVID-19 pandemic might have generated more heterogeneous effects on family life than a first glance would suggest. And I would now like with you to present some descriptive evidence on relationship quality to see which is the case for Italy, and in particular, first in the early stages of the pandemic on April 2020. Here I'm relying on an online survey called Intergen COVID, conducted by the survey company Lucid, which is known for its high academic reputation and also rigor of data collection. The data collection for Italy, France, and Spain was centralized here at the University of Florence at my department from under the coordination of Bruno Arpino. The data are for 9,186 individuals. This is not, to be clear, a probabilistic sample, but this is a sample in which we imposed quotas by age, gender, region, and education. So at least we can adjust the descriptive statistics and the model estimates for such national quotas. I'm here reporting in these slides the link to the website of the survey if you're curious to know more about this data and the publications that have been made out of this data. I will be analyzing the question about since the entry into force of the first nationwide restrictions due to the coronavirus in your country, have you experienced any of these changes? And among the possible answers, the respondents could choose worsened relation with partner. So I will be analyzing the worsening in partnership quality during the lockdown, focusing on married and cohabiting couples in which the respondent is aged between 20 to 60. And thanks to this data, we are able to operationalize our three key spheres of interest: the emotional sphere, through the questions about having felt more lonely, having felt more depressed, and not having spent more time with family members. The emotional sphere, job loss and income loss, and the organizational sphere by analyzing whether the respondent experienced difficulties with organizing work from home. This figure reports the percentage of married or cohabiting respondents that declared a worsening in their relationship by country. We observe that in all three countries, around 12% of the respondents report a worsening of the quality of their intimate relationship. So, honestly speaking, not a huge effect here, with no particular gender differences detected. Importantly, the worsening in relationship quality seems more pronounced in couples with children, here considered aged less than 15, at least in Italy and France. Moving now to some multivariable analysis, I'm showing you results of a logistic regression predicting a worsening in relation with partner. I'm showing you the results in terms of average marginal effects of our key markers of emotional, paid work, and organizational domains. The results are quite straightforward, very intuitive. Just keep in mind that all the estimates I'm showing you are controlled for very many confounding variables included in the model equation, which I'm not, of course, showing in this presentation. So net of all other variables included in the model equation, we note that, as expected, those couples who have experienced an increasing feeling lonely or felt more depressed are more likely to report a decrease of relationship quality during the lockdown than those who have not experienced such feelings. Importantly, we do not note a significant or sizable difference between couples with children and all couples, namely the estimates indicated in the graph with the empty and the full dots. The group of respondents that have experienced a job or an income loss are more likely to report a decrease in relationship quality compared to the others. The average marginal effects are indeed positive. Their magnitude is, however, relatively small, about 3–4 percentage points, and not statistically significant. And finally, we note that having more organizational struggles is associated with a decrease in relationship quality. The average marginal effects are positive, between 4–6 percentage points, and only marginally significant. Importantly, these results remain unchanged also after restricting the sample to couples with children. So, summarizing these first insights into the effect of COVID-19 on couples' relationship quality, this first part of the presentation just offers some descriptive evidence in the very early stages of the emergency. It seems that love does not laugh at locksmiths, a non-negligible, but altogether also not huge proportion of respondents, 12%, reported that their relationship has worsened during the lockdown. The direct stressors proved especially crucial. Feeling alone during the lockdown is, for instance, associated with a weakening of intimate relationships in all 3 countries. Interestingly, indirect stressors did not play an important role. For instance, job and income loss did not prove to be particularly influential. But these results only concern the very first stages of the pandemic. Indeed, in current research, virtually or mostly only short-term consequences of the pandemic have been explored. But the crucial question is what has happened then as time passed, because couples may even adapt to a new family life organization, to a new reality, to a new normal, and the initial shock might be counterbalanced by couples' adaptive strategies. And what is more, the COVID-19 pandemic, given its duration and pervasiveness, appears as incomparable to shocks of short time interval. Consequently, one needs to explore relationship quality both in the early and later stages of the pandemic to gain a better understanding of its effects on family life. So what I'm doing now is to explore and to offer descriptive evidence on relationship quality in the later stages of the pandemic. In September 2021, 1 year and a half after the onset of the emergency in Italy. And in exploring relationship quality in the later stages of the pandemic, our analytical focus is on the association between the reallocation of couples' role sets following the pandemic and relationship satisfaction. From a theoretical perspective, drawing from the multiple equilibrium approach and the gender revolution theory, we may anticipate 2 main perspectives. On the one side, we may advance a negative shift. Women have largely took on the increased burden of the household and care activities, widening the gender gap in the household division of labor. This state of affairs might have further strengthened the unstable equilibrium in the gender division of labor, with a consequent worsening in relationship quality. But on the other side, we may also advocate a positive shift. After such a huge shock, couples might have experienced a more balanced household and care division, with an initially forced greater involvement of the male partners, with couples potentially finding a new, more balanced equilibrium in the gender division of labor, with a consequent improvement in relationship quality. These 2 perspectives are clearly not mutually exclusive. Rather, they are likely to operate in tandem, at the same time depending on differential partners' characteristics, for instance, as we will see in terms of their gender ideology. So in the following, I will explore the association between these 2 possible shifts, negative, positive, and an intermediate shift in between, on relationship quality in Italy using novel population level data we just collected. And why Italy? Not only because I'm Italian, but because Italy offers, as usual in family research, an intriguing case study. Preliminary evidence from Italy shows that there was a shift, an initial shift towards a more equal distribution of household and childcare tasks between men and women during the very first months of the pandemic. Also, regarding paid work, a recent paper did not find any sign of traditionalization among couples with dependent children. To be sure, however, in the later stages of the pandemic, most of the extra unpaid work caused by the crisis fell on women more in Italy than in other countries, like, for instance, because of the increase in childcare due to the Italian long and prolonged school closures. As for the data, this time I rely on FamilyDemic. FamilyDemic is a collaborative international project and a network of researchers located, coordinated by the University of Warsaw. The focus of FamilyDemic is on the immediate and long-term consequences of policy responses to the COVID-19 outbreak for the distribution of paid and unpaid work in couples and their labor market outcomes in diverse welfare regimes. The countries involved in FamilyDemic are Canada, Germany, Italy, Poland, Sweden, and the United States. And at the University of Florence, at my department, we coordinated the data collection for Italy. And I actually let you imagine
a problem in the electricity has gone down in the department of Daniele, and is now going to connect again using his mobile phone. So sorry about that. For the people listening, I'm really sorry that happened. There are some works, and therefore that's why the electricity went. Daniele, we can hear you.
My gosh, sorry, but we lost the electricity in all the streets here.
I told them, I kept them updated, Daniele. So you can go on with the presentation, maybe. Okay, so these figures here illustrate the predicted probabilities of worsening the top panel and or improving the bottom panel relationship quality by parenthood status and age of children, net of all confounders included in the model equation. Couples with children are those who are more likely to have experienced a worsening in relationship quality. This is especially the case for women with preschool children. They are almost 10 percentage points more likely to see a worsening in relationship satisfaction compared to childless women. But at the same time, among men and women with children, we also note improvements in relationship quality. And this is consistent with the descriptive finding that couples with small children show a high degree of heterogeneity in their responses to the pandemic. And according to our hypothesis, the differences among gender ideology of couples and couples' changes in unpaid work may account for these heterogeneous findings, especially among couples with children. This figure here shows the combined effects of the presence and age of children and gender ideology on worsening relationship satisfaction. So the right panel shows that among women with more traditional gender ideologies, scoring 3 on a rudimentary index from 0 to 10, those with a preschool child, the squared simple, are approximately 15 percentage points more likely to have experienced a worsening of their relationship satisfaction compared to women with no children or women with a youngest child older than 18. These differences, based on the presence of children, are much smaller when focusing on women with more equal gender role attitudes, scoring 9 in our index. And in this case, the differences in the worsening relationship satisfaction become virtually null. The same pattern of results, although in a slightly muted form, is confirmed also among men. And this figure here shows the same combined effects of the presence and age of children and gender ideology, this time on the probability of having experienced an improvement in relationship satisfaction. In particular here, women with children aged less than 12 are characterized by substantial increases in the predicted probability of experiencing an improvement in relationship satisfaction as they move from lower to higher level of gender ideals. For instance, among women with a child aged between 6 and 11, the X symbols here highlighted
the probability of experiencing an improvement in relationship satisfaction jumps from 20 to 35%. Results are very similar for men, but differences by level of gender ideology are substantially relevant only among fathers. A final finding, which I think is the one that Georgia was already anticipating, is emerge when looking at changes in relationship quality by partners' shifts in unpaid work division. And this is the main message here. There is a significant unseizable improvement in relationship satisfaction among couples in which the female partner devotes less time to unpaid work and the male partner devotes more time compared to the pre-pandemic period. Among women, the right panel, the probability jumps from 20 when she increased her relative share of unpaid work to 31% if he increased his relative contribution to domestic tasks. Among the male respondents, this time the left panel, the result is symmetrical, as the probability of having improved relationship satisfaction increases by 12 percentage points if he increased his domestic tasks compared if she increased domestic tasks. If he increased 36% when she increased 24%, so very symmetrical between partners. The combination associated with the highest improvement in relationship satisfaction among both female and male respondents is the one in which both partners increased the amount of time devoted to unpaid work. Overall, these results suggest that the relationship satisfaction improved for both partners in those couples where unpaid work division adjustments following the COVID-19 pandemic fostered a more balanced division of tasks. And this was, above all, due to an increased contribution from the male partners, And now moving to the conclusions. Clearly, the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic are not only economic. Couples and intimate relationships are also vulnerable. But at the end of the day, in the later stages of the pandemic, we do not see overwhelming negative effects of the COVID-19 for couples' relationship satisfaction. Why? First of all, this might be due to selection. Non-resilient couples to direct stressors of the pandemic in the early stages of the emergency could not have survived until September 2021. And this is likely to be especially the case for some cohabiting couples. Here we are conditioning on unbroken couples during the pandemic to be able to compare their relationship quality before and after. The limited negative impact of COVID-19 for relationship quality might also be due to couples' long-term adaptation strategies. Less fragile couples initially experienced a shock in their family life, and in fact, more direct stressors, you remember the first part of the presentation, related to their subjective states, appeared as crucial predictors of negative changes in relationship satisfaction due to the lockdown. But then, in the longer term, they seem to have recovered and searching for and eventually finding a new equilibrium. More generally, we did not find a fatal effect of COVID-19 on Italian couples. With this study, we therefore reject the standard narrative of a simple, uniform, and unidirectional negative effect of the pandemic on relationship quality. And we also contest the idea that all families experienced negative adjustments after the COVID-19 pandemic. Families are not a monolith. What we rather find here is a great level of heterogeneity in responses and a great variation in family rearrangements following the pandemic and relationship satisfaction. Importantly, the degree of variation in relationship quality found in our data over such a short time span, 18 months in total, is far higher than what is usually found in existing studies. Therefore, our results conflate with the prior evidence, suggesting that the patterns we found here should not be seen just as a background couples, as a background process within couples, but rather as something that has been shaped by the pandemic. So from this perspective, can we really advance the idea of a COVID effect on relationships? We think no. In our view, the COVID-19 disaster represented, clear unfortunately, an engine of family reshuffling, especially when relatively young children are involved. Namely, given such an unexpected emergency and home confinement, family reallocated their time use, eventually altering their couples' role sets. For some couples, mostly with egalitarian gender attitudes, the pandemic has offered the opportunity for searching a new equilibrium with a more balanced allocation of roles and higher levels of relationship quality. But for other couples with less egalitarian gender ideology, the pandemic has been followed by negative adjustments, further fostering an unstable equilibrium in the couple's organizational sphere, with also negative consequences for relationship quality. In this case, the pandemic has further fostered pre-existing gender inequalities within dual earner couples in the division of domestic tasks, favoring relationship dissatisfaction. So really summarizing, the pandemic has created a huge amount of variation in family life. Things changed and nothing is as before, as in a sort of forced social experiment on gender equality. When children are involved, about 45–50% of couples experienced some changes in their relationship satisfaction. Then couples tried to adapt the new reality, with some experiencing losses and other gains in their relationship quality. Gender ideology played the crucial role here in moderating these adaptation processes, where the context was more favorable to a more balanced reallocation of roles and perhaps responsibilities between partners. Couples did not necessarily appear as the losers of the pandemic. Thank you, and sorry for all the technical problems.
Thank you very much, Daniele. Before, I don't see any question in the chat, I would like to ask you a couple of questions. Two of them are clarifying questions. One is on the index of gender ideology. You say it ranged from 0 to 10 or 9. Can you say something more about this index that you have used?
Yes, so I'm sharing again, because this is something that I was skipping because of the
time, yeah, the power break.
Exactly. So here we are. So the index is based on the two standard questions about the roles of mothers and fathers. One is, fathers are as well suited to look after their children as mothers, and mothers should be responsible for financially supporting their families as fathers. Both questions allow an answer on a 5-point Likert scale, and we just built a rudimentary index summing up the answers. As you can see here from the slides, those who are showing slightly higher levels of gender ideology are also those who experienced, in fact, improvement in the relationship. So it's quite rudimentary, it's just summing up the answers to these two standard questions here.
Thanks. The second question I have is on the, did you consider only married couple, or you also considered partners?
We consider both married and cohabiting couples that did not experience a disruption during this 1.5 years of the pandemic. So clearly we are conditioning to these unbroken couples, which is more serious among cohabiting couples, because probably the easiest disruptions that couples experienced were among cohabitors. So it could be that we are selecting among cohabitors really only those who are strongest in the relationship. But we have both here, cohabiting, married, and also living apart together relationships are included here. So partners who have an intimate relationship, but they are living in different homes.
Country, yeah. Oh, okay. I also would like to know something about the direction of causality that you have, because you have an improvement in the satisfaction if you have a balanced or fair division of labor. But maybe you may have a fair or balanced division of labor if you are happy with your couple.
this is absolutely possible in the sense that what we see here, we are controlling for many characteristics of the couple. What we focus on here is the adjustments in the division of labor within the pandemic period and the consequences on the change in the relationship satisfaction. Change in relationship satisfaction comparing January 2020 and September 2021, net of the level of satisfaction. So net of the level, we see changes. So there can be some causality issues, but here we are really looking at what the adjustments in the division of unpaid work and whether these adjustments affected an adjustment in relationship satisfaction.
The question that I was trying to pose when there was the power cut is that there is a result which I found particularly interesting in your presentation, and is what you also highlighted now, which is the improvement when the female partner devotes less time to unpaid work and the man more time. Now, you divide your results in the short run and long run results. In the short run, you have similar results for Italy, Spain, and France. In the long run, you analyze basically only the case of Italy, and in any case, the sample is different. So you could analyze a difference with Germany or with Hungary, but not, or Sweden or whatever, but not with the same two countries, Spain and France. So I wonder whether there is, whether you think that the long run result could be generalized to other countries, the one that you found in Italy, especially since Italy is a country where is not really equaliter, is not equal, the burden that women and men have. And whether that can be generalized or whether that depends too much on the data issue and therefore you cannot say anything.
I think that it is very interesting to see whether these findings can be generalized. So the next step will definitely will be to make a comparative paper with all the other countries involved in family dynamic. We are currently working on several comparisons based on this data. It was a huge effort to collect this data. I could not really present them because of the power cut, but putting together the questionnaire, organizing the input from 20 researchers from these 7 countries, it was a nightmare during the last spring that I would not suggest to my worst enemy, actually. But in the end, we came out with a very nice questionnaire, and I really look forward to see whether our results will apply to other countries. My expectation is that the results here are amplified by the Italian context, in the sense that the division was so much unequal that really this kind of changes may have affected relationship quality in a positive way, in a strongest way than as we will see in other countries. This is just an expectation, and I look forward to see whether this is actually realized.
Was it a fair division of labor, yours with the other researchers in other countries, or not? Because then your satisfaction can change.
And it was very fair, and even too fair, because when it's too fair, it's also longer, the process.
So that's good. I don't know whether there are any other questions. I only have, you mentioned something which you didn't get into, which is the communication mismatch. Can you elaborate a little on that as well?
Yes. There are some papers in psychology emphasizing how the same shock can be perceived by both partners in a different way, creating a communication mismatch in the sense that the same event is then indeed picked up from different perspectives, and there is no possibility to really discuss within that context. So a shock creates a communication mismatch when it's differently perceived by the two partners.
Thanks, Daniele. Last but not least, the difference between the short run and the long run can also be due to the fact that the job loss were not very, that you considered when you presented the first part of the paper, there were not many job loss in the first phase, because a lot of measures were put forward by the government, especially in the countries that you were analyzing, which are France, Italy, and Spain. So there was basically, people could not lay off workers. So there was not, I mean, people would have expected big increase in unemployment. This did not happen because of the measures that were put forward. Do you think this may have affected your results?
Yes, there are two aspects. One is exactly this, we discussed this in the paper quite extensively, that there were counterbalance measures put into force by the government that may have mitigated this impact of job loss and income loss. At the same time, it's also true that in the short term, especially, this was really a suspension of the ordinary, and pretty much the psychological factors were the strongest. Then, in the longer term, the differences by socioeconomic status of individual will appear and disappearing much more crucial than it was in the very first months. In that very first months, there were very minimal socio-demographic differentials, but this is also expected because that was really the immediate reaction to the pandemic. Things were so strongly changing that the emotions were almost filtering all the effects. But then in the longer term, clearly, socio-demographic differences are playing a stronger role, as my second part of the presentation clearly is showing.
Yeah, I wonder, because a lot of people are discussing about workers resigning after having experienced the shock from their job to get into new forms of jobs or to get self-employed or something like that. Do you have any question in the questionnaire that could study also this aspect?
Yes, we do have these questions in the questionnaire. We have quite detailed questions about the paid work, and also we have a roster showing month by month what has happened to the employment sphere. So this is something we could dig into, but we haven't done it yet. But definitely there is room for doing it.
Thank you very much, Daniele. I think we have, despite the power cut, we have had a really nice lecture from Daniele Vignoli, and we have now finished our time. And unless you want to say anything else, because I don't see any question in the chat. People were scared by the power cut, I suppose.
Or they left after the power cut.
No, they're still there. I can see the participant. So they are still there. If there is no questions, I have asked many questions to Daniele.
No, I thank you, Giorgia, for the very interesting questions. As always, you were able to immediately pick up the key points of the presentation and ask questions. So thank you very much for the discussion. This was a pleasure for me. Thanks,
Daniele. So thank you very much for this first EUniWell lecture at the University of Florence. And we will be working together. So thanks to everyone who participated, and see you soon. See you to the next EUniWell lecture.